that if you despair, it is not something which is unnatural despair, because sometimes, you might become depressed, or you might have different type of thoughts which are going through, and you might feel to yourself that these are unnatural things which are happening to you. They are not unnatural things. They are real things which are happening to you. The Quran is telling us that you will go through these things. And when it does happen to you, what you need to be able to do, the solution to the problem is that of rahmatillah. La taqnatu min do not despair of the mercy of Allah. So the loving mercy of Allah now comes in as the cure, because if you begin to reflect on the loving mercy of Allah, then you begin to bear in mind some of the principles I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to go through some of these principles. Now, a lot of the principles which I'm going to talk about relate to something which is known as our worldview. And we've spoken about our worldview, answering some of those basic and essential questions in life. Now, our worldview shapes our physical and our emotional well-being, how you view the world. And therefore, it will shape that which you do, how much you perform, whether you're successful or not in your endeavors, whether you live a good family life. And then that in itself will lead on to the type of success that you would want. So it's looking at it in a reverse way. So in a sense, the point at which we want to look at now is, what about the worldview? That bit is so important. So when we think about the worldview, what is your worldview? Again, we've been through the slide, or slides similar to it, looking at answering some of these basic questions of life. And very often what happens to people is that they lose sight of their worldview, of why they exist, of what is the nature of life, of what is the purpose of what are they meant to be doing, and where does this illness come into the picture? Okay, so I'm not going to go too much into this. Now, the Quranic worldview, if you look carefully at this diagram here, what you would find is that there are a number of things to bear in mind. One is that of your values. What are your priorities in life? That will help dictate part of your worldview. It also deals with your behavior. What are the choices I make in my life? And that of culture shaping. What impact am I having on the culture mood around me? And that of reflection and adjustment. So this is interesting about this thing about Quranic worldview and values, because this is something, unfortunately, which is not taught in a normal Islamic curricula. You would not find this diagram anywhere in Islamic curricula, which is sad, because what it means is that when it comes to ethics and values, one of my close friends, Professor Atallah Siddiqui, he conducts a course with scholars, who want to be able to progress and gain higher degrees, in their MPhils and so on, PhDs. One of the first questions he asks them about is that, write down 5 Quranic values. Simple statement, write 5 Quranic values. And he says that this stumps all of these, learned people who've graduated from Islamic institutions. Many of them start writing, and he says, collects his paper from them. What did you write? Prayer, zakat, fasting, obeying your parents. These are not values. They are actions, but they are not values. So going back to the primacy of worldview, of values, of ethics, of behavior, those things are important. And those things which you have to derive out of the Quran. This is why critical thinking is so important. Okay, so let's look at some of these 10 principles. The first one is to go back in the beginning. And in the beginning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks us the question, Alastu bi rabbikum? And this was asked of each one of us. So people often said, I don't know, there is no God or whatever it is, I never entered into a pact with him. Yes, you did. So somewhere buried in your subconscious, within your DNA, is this whole idea of Rabb. It is ingrained within you. It is an innate part of you. whether or not you're a recipient of divine revelation or not, you will find it's within you. Because even before you were created, millions of years before that, this is what existed. Alastu bi rabbikum. Qalu. And they said, Bala. Of course, certainly. Shahidna. We bear testimony to this. So this link with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this link with the subconscious of Allah is something which is always there. I mean, yesterday we spoke about in the spirituality session that Allah is always with us. He is with us. He's close to us, but we are far from Him. Despite the distance, there is no distance which separates us from Him. So the covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and these are some of the basic things to bear in mind. So if you were a therapist, if you were somebody who has a friend, or has a colleague, or somebody who that you want to help, who may have, who are going through all sorts of different things in their life, the starting point of all of this is to start with Allah and to tell Him about that loving God who has given you all of that which you have. That if mere fact that you are alive today is a great blessing, and to begin to show positive things, to begin to show all the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. And I gave a talk, I think it was about a couple of months ago, at a forum for medical doctors. And what I did is I looked at a therapeutic model. I looked at a therapeutic model of healing using a surah of the Quran, Surah Al-Duha. So I used Surah Al-Duha and I developed a therapeutic model of healing to be able to show how in that surah, what are the common things that people complain about, and how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went through a mental crisis in his life. He suffered from a mental crisis in his life. Okay? And how that mental crisis, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was able to address that mental crisis. And it's a surah not just for him, but it's a surah for everybody. It's a surah for everybody. Okay, and it's something that we don't have time to do today, but certainly we can do it perhaps another time, inshallah. So remember this first one. So the second one is about the nature of the dunya. You see, human beings, if you think about the Quran, human beings go through a cycle in our lives. And this cycle is not just based upon our age, how we age, whether or not you are, or whether or not you go through your child and you become a youth and then become a teenager and then you become somebody who's in the middle ages and somebody who's old. Okay, that's one type of cycle. And in this cycle, you also have other things. So you have la'ib, you have lahum, you have zina, and then you have tafakrum, which means know that the present life is but a sport and a diversion, an adornment and a cause for boasting among you, and a rivalry in wealth and children. Now, a lot of things are lumped together in this particular ayah. A lot of things which can distract people. But if you want to know for a particular person what it is that is foremost in terms of what it is most likely to distract them, you look at this particular ayah of the Quran. And in this particular ayah of the Quran is telling us that the things people are focused upon as a child, right? The child is focused upon, the child only wants to play, isn't it? Toys, you give them that, they're happy. They're not worried about, whether or not lunch is going to come, whether or not, we're going to be living here, whatever it is. You can move house 10 times, but a little 2-year-old child is not going to know the difference. Okay? But if it is that you were a child who is older, or, when you get into youth and so, then it begins to make a difference. Okay? And then it moves on again to lahun, so a child just wants toys, but then you go on to play. That's what they play, sport, recreation are things which are important in their life. And then it moves on from things like recreation. And then when you become almost like a young adult or a teenager, then you're very much worried about, you're self-conscious about yourself. So things like self-esteem, self-awareness, about identity crisis. These are the things that the Quran is telling us that are foremost in people's mind. why young people are cutting themselves. I mean, bright young children are cutting themselves in school. We know that. And it's not that they don't know any better. They're cutting themselves because they're all aware. They say, well, look, how many, I don't like the way that I look. My hair is too short or long. My skin complexion is what it should be. That she looks prettier than me. And so that type of thing is there. They're sort of consumed with that type of thing. And then the Quran tells us that beyond that is that an adornment and a cause for boasting. And now, when it is that you move up in terms of your needs, what happens is this. Now you begin to think about, hold on. I know that I live wherever I live, but I'm thinking about where am I going to be living in the future. So you're thinking about your home. So your priorities change. Your home, your career, your getting a spouse. All of these things are going through your mind. And when you get those things now, what begins to consume you is not that you have these things, but why it is that somebody has something which is better than me. So you're looking around and you say, well, look, my house has only 2 bedrooms. How come my friend who is in my class, he has a 3-bedroom house? He has 4-bedroom house. Okay? So you see how they begin to boast and begin to compete with each other. And these things are important because those things, especially when we're talking about the issue in the context of our psycho-spiritual health, these are the things which are responsible for taking people and making people develop some of these disorders. There has to be triggering points. And these are some of the triggering points. People can go into a state of depression.